The prairie wind carried the scent of dust and sweat as the sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, painting the small western town of Red Hollow in streaks of crimson and gold. The streets, usually alive with the stomping of boots and the ring of horse hooves, were unusually hushed that evening, as though the town itself held its breath for what was about to unfold. At the center of it all was Evelyn Carter, a woman whose story had been written in hardship and loss, her face too young to bear such sorrow, but her eyes too wise to belong to innocence. Her wrists were bound, her lips trembled, and as the crowd gathered in silence, she whispered words meant only for the man standing before her. "Please, just make it quick." The rancher, Daniel McGraw, towered over her, a man carved from stone and shadow, known as much for his mercy as for the violence he had unleashed in the name of survival. His broad shoulders carried the burden of a life lived on the edge, a life filled with choices that haunted him when the whiskey ran out and the fire burned low at night. Every man, woman, and child in Red Hollow knew Daniel as the rancher who had tamed the wild lands, who had fought off bandits with the same determination he used to break wild stallions. But none of them had ever seen him like this, standing at the crossroads of duty and desire, law and longing. The tale that had brought them to this moment was one of betrayal, vengeance, and secrets buried beneath the prairie soil, secrets Evelyn carried in her heart like a brand. The crowd muttered in low tones, some demanding justice, others pity, but all hungry for resolution, for the cruel theater of frontier justice had always been the only entertainment in such a desolate place. Daniel's hand tightened on the rope, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her chest like a vice. But instead of raising his hand to strike, instead of delivering the swift punishment everyone expected, Daniel's eyes softened, and something unthinkable stirred within him, a refusal, a defiance that set the crowd roaring in disbelief. "No," he said, his voice steady but thick with the pain of a man at war with himself. "This ain't how her story ends." Gasps rippled through the gathering like wind through dry grass, and Evelyn's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and dread. The rancher, who had lived by the code of blood and retribution, had chosen mercy in a land where mercy was as rare as rain in August. But Daniel's decision was not born from weakness. It was born from something stronger, something more dangerous, a love he could not admit and a truth he could not deny. The crowd pressed forward, angry shouts rising above the silence, men demanding justice for wrongs Evelyn had been accused of, crimes whispered about in saloons and behind closed doors. They said she had betrayed the town, sold secrets to bandits, lured men to their deaths with her beauty and lies. Whether it was true or not no longer mattered. Perception in Red Hollow was as good as law. But Daniel knew the truth, or at least enough of it to damn himself in the eyes of the town. He had seen the way Evelyn had suffered, had heard the quiver in her voice when she told him about the man who had forced her hand, the choices that had not been choices at all but survival in its cruelest form. She was no traitor. She was a survivor, and if Red Hollow wanted blood, they would have to go through him to get it. The sun sank lower, and the shadows lengthened, stretching across the street like grasping fingers. Daniel cut the rope from Evelyn's wrists, the knife flashing in the dying light, and for a heartbeat the entire town froze, stunned into silence by his defiance. Evelyn's knees buckled, and Daniel caught her, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he held her steady. "You'll not touch her," he growled, his voice carrying the weight of thunder. "Not while I draw breath." The crowd erupted, men shouting, women wailing, children clutching their mothers' skirts as the fragile order of the town crumbled before their eyes. The sheriff, a man too weak to stand against the tide, wrung his hands and looked away, unwilling to confront the rancher who had done more to build Red Hollow than any lawman ever could. In that moment, Daniel and Evelyn became fugitives, outlaws not by deed, but by choice, their bond sealed not by words but by fire and defiance. As he led her through the chaos, as bullets threatened to fly and fists threatened to rise, Evelyn whispered again, her voice barely audible above the din. "Why, Daniel? Why would you risk everything for me?" He didn't answer, not with words, for some truths could not be spoken aloud, not in front of a town that would never understand. Instead, he pulled her close, shielding her with his own body, and in his silence she found the answer she had been searching for. Their escape was not clean, nor was it certain, but it was enough to set the prairie alight with whispers of rebellion, of love forged in the crucible of defiance. And as the stars pricked the velvet sky and the night swallowed the town of Red Hollow, Daniel McGraw and Evelyn Carter vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind a story that would be told and retold for generations, a story of mercy where none was expected, of love where none was allowed, of a rancher who did the unthinkable. And if you, listener, are caught in the grip of this tale, if you want to hear what fate awaited them beyond the edge of Red Hollow, then make sure you subscribe to this channel, because the next chapter will carry you deeper into the fire, deeper into the danger, and into the very heart of what it means to live and love in the unforgiving West. The wilderness stretched out before them like an ocean of grass and stone, endless and unforgiving, a land that swallowed the weak and tested the strong. Daniel and Evelyn rode hard beneath the silver light of the moon, the thunder of hooves echoing across the canyons, as though the earth itself bore witness to their flight. Behind them, Red Hollow smoldered with outrage, a town betrayed by its hero, a town that would not rest until justice, or vengeance, was served. But ahead of them lay only uncertainty, the promise of freedom tempered by the threat of pursuit. Every sound in the darkness set Evelyn's heart racing, every rustle of brush or crack of twig a reminder that they were hunted. Yet despite her fear, despite the ache in her body and the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, she felt something she had not known in years: hope. Daniel rode beside her, silent and resolute, his jaw clenched and his eyes scanning the horizon, as though he could will the future into submission. He was not a man of many words, but in the way he shielded her, in the way he checked her reins, in the way he offered her the last of the water without hesitation, she found comfort. Still, the question gnawed at her. Why? Why had he risked everything for her, when he owed her nothing but the same condemnation the town had so eagerly given? She remembered the way the crowd had looked at her, eyes filled with hatred, voices demanding her blood, and she shivered. "Daniel," she whispered at last, her voice carried away by the wind. "Why did you save me?" He didn't answer immediately, his silence stretching so long she wondered if he had even heard her. But finally, when the moon dipped low and the stars burned brighter, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "Because I've seen enough innocent blood spilled in this world. Because you deserved better. And because—" He trailed off, as though the words themselves were too dangerous to release into the night air. Evelyn turned toward him, searching his face in the pale light, and for the first time she saw not the unbreakable rancher the town had worshipped, but a man haunted by ghosts of his own. Whatever drove him, it was deeper than duty, deeper than justice. It was something that bound him to her in ways she could not yet understand. Days turned into nights, nights into days, and still they rode, stopping only to rest their horses and snatch what little food they could. The wilderness tested them, its hunger and thirst, its storms and silence, but through it all they endured. Evelyn learned to read the stars under Daniel's guidance, learned to hunt rabbits with a snare, learned to move silently through the tall grass like a shadow. In turn, she gave him laughter in moments where the weight of the world threatened to crush him, gave him stories of her childhood before the sorrow had come, stories that made him remember that the world, for all its cruelty, could still hold beauty. But the past was never far behind. One evening, as they camped beside a river that glimmered like liquid silver, Daniel's sharp ears caught the distant echo of riders. Pursuit had come at last. They had no illusions. Red Hollow's men would not forgive, would not forget, and would not rest until Evelyn's blood stained the dirt. Daniel stood, his hand on his revolver, his eyes hard as iron. "They'll be here by dawn," he said, his voice steady. Evelyn's heart clenched, and for a moment she was tempted to whisper the words again. "Please, just make it quick." But she swallowed them, for she knew now that Daniel was not a man who would abandon her, not a man who would surrender to despair. Instead, he did the unthinkable once more. He smiled. A small, grim smile, but a smile nonetheless. "We'll make our stand," he said, "and we'll do it together." The hours until dawn were filled with preparation, with whispered words and unspoken promises. Daniel showed Evelyn how to reload the rifle, how to steady her hands, how to aim not with fear but with focus. She listened, learned, and when the first rays of light painted the sky, she stood at his side, no longer the trembling woman who had begged for mercy in Red Hollow, but a fighter ready to claim her place in the world. The riders came, a dozen men fueled by rage and righteousness, their faces twisted with the certainty of their cause. But Daniel and Evelyn stood their ground. And when the dust cleared, when the smoke of gunfire drifted away, it was not the hunters who remained, but the hunted who had triumphed. Blood was spilled that day, but not Evelyn's. Daniel took wounds that would scar him, wounds that might have killed a lesser man, but he stood tall, his will stronger than the bullets that sought to break him. Evelyn wept as she bound his wounds, not out of sorrow but out of awe, out of the realization that love could be born even in the ashes of violence, that hope could rise even from the shadow of despair. And so their story did not end in tragedy, but in defiance, in love, in the promise of a future built not on fear, but on freedom. As the sun rose high and the birds took flight, Evelyn looked at Daniel and whispered words she had never thought she would say again. Thank you for not making it quick. And if you, dear listener, have followed their journey through the dust and fire, through betrayal and mercy, through the unthinkable choices that define us, then I invite you to stay with us, to subscribe to this channel so that you never miss another tale of the Wild West, where legends are born and love is tested against the harshest of frontiers. Because Daniel and Evelyn's story is but one of many, and the prairie has countless more to tell.